Hi everyone, Samir and Sumit here, and welcome back to our F1 podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
And I quite enjoyed this race actually. It was a really good race in my opinion, much better than Bahrain actually.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of battles, and I think the fact that it was a street circuit made it a lot better because not only is it a street circuit, but it was also the fastest street circuit in the world. And so it was really fun to see all the cars like so close to the walls. Some cars actually hitting the walls, but
Yep.
managed to get away with it. But like it was really fun to see this race.
Yeah, obviously this is the third race in Jeddah that we've had in Formula One, and all three races have been really exciting. Probably not, this race has probably not been as exciting as the last two, but it's definitely not far behind from them.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think anything can beat 2021, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
That crazy race between Verstappen and Hamilton. But this weekend was definitely a really interesting weekend.
Yep. So going into the weekend, then let's start with Thursday. And the big story around Thursday was the fact that Charles Leclerc would be taking a 10-place grid penalty going into this weekend because Ferrari would have to change the control electronics in his car. And obviously they changed it in Bahrain too. So you're only allowed two control electronics per race weekend, and so they used one in Bahrain, and now they had to change out another one, and that went over his allocation for the season, so that would earn him a 10-place grid penalty.
Already, I mean, they've used up both
Yeah.
control electronics, just typical Ferrari reliability. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully they can get it ironed out throughout the season and take as little penalties as possible.
Yep.
But another story on Thursday was that Max Verstappen wouldn't be at the track. I mean,
Yes,
he
that
had a
was the big
stomach
one.
bug, so he wouldn't be able to come to the track until Friday. But Red Bull and him both assured that he would be in FP1 and 2, and he'd be on the track at Friday. He just arrived there Friday instead of Thursday. So maybe there was a little speculation that Ricardo could step in, but
Yeah.
maybe for like 2 minutes, and then everyone realized no, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Some people like Ferrari fans probably wanted Ricardo to step in instead of Verstappen, but Verstappen ended up at the track on Friday, and he did make a big impression. And FP1 at the end of FP1, he finished P1. And not just P1, he finished 4 tenths ahead
Yeah,
of
it was a
P2
big gap.
Sergio Perez. Obviously, FP1 times aren't that don't show the true speed of the teams.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty clear indication that Verstappen was here and ready to fight.
Yeah, so obviously you said he finished ahead or he finished like a big margin ahead of the next place man, and the next place man was Sergio Perez too. So Red Bull were looking really quick here in Jeddah, as they've been looking in the last 2 years, and especially coming off of their 1-2 in Bahrain, they'll be looking to continue that form and just to keep on nipping away at it and trying to earn Max Verstappen a third world championship. So in FP1 too, one of the biggest concerns in FP1 was the fact that the newly profiled turn 22 was catching a lot of drivers out. So what they changed on the turn 22 was that they made it a lot more narrow. So the cars, like the drivers were usually they're used to kind of braking a bit later, but now they have to brake a lot earlier and get a much sharper turn in because it's a quick left to right chicane kind of, but it's very flowing. So it was catching a lot of drivers out, Max Verstappen included too. So drivers would definitely have to be getting used to that a lot. And that would be a common thing, a common trend we would see throughout most of this weekend. The drivers going off at turn 22, especially in the race. But we'll
Yeah,
get more to that later.
it really never got better throughout the weekend. I mean, there were consistently drivers
Yeah.
going off the track there, even at towards the end of the race after you've had so many repetitions of that throughout the weekend. Even then, there were still drivers going off. But Verstappen, even though he finished P1, he was still having issues, not just going off the track. Like he had issues everywhere, kind of. He couldn't
Yeah.
really turn in. He said he didn't have any front end, and it was not what Red Bull were looking. I mean, even when he did get the fastest lap, they still needed a lot of tuning throughout the weekend to get his Red Bull into the window that he wanted. And another thing that happened was with Fernando Alonso, like, and he was getting a lot of traffic throughout the weekend, like throughout the practice session. But
Yeah.
not just Alonso, also like almost all the cars. Like Leclerc was complaining, Russell was complaining. So I mean, Saudi Arabia, it's a really fast track, and there's a lot of blind turns. So if you really are going through those turns at such high speeds, you won't be able to see the car, and so it requires a lot of engineering communication to the driver to make sure that they see the other drivers.
Yeah, what you said about the traffic too, that is another trend that we're gonna see throughout this weekend, because that also really doesn't get much better until the race, obviously, because then you're not really worried about getting stuck behind a car so that you can get a qualifying lap in. But traffic was a problem throughout all three of the practice sessions and in qualifying too. But going on then with the rest of the drivers too, another driver who's looking really quick was the ever happy Fernando Alonso now with Aston Martin off the back of his podium in Bahrain. He was looking really happy in his Aston Martin too, but again he was also getting caught out in some traffic as well. So he was not the only one, but his teammate Lance Stroll as well was also getting caught in traffic.
Yeah, Alonso looking really happy with the general pace of the Aston Martin
Yeah.
throughout the whole track. He liked how it felt, but some people that who didn't like how their cars felt, Lewis Hamilton
Yeah.
in his Mercedes, he was complaining about it that he couldn't find any time, whilst other teams were finding like 5 tenths here and there, making significant improvements. It felt like Hamilton in his Mercedes couldn't really improve on anything. And also the Ferraris, Leclerc and Sainz, both of them weren't really happy with their pace because they seem to be struggling around all the corners kind of. Saudi Arabia has a lot of high speed corners, and so if your car struggles in the high speed corners in general, this track is really gonna kill you. So Ferrari really needed to figure out how to improve that.
Yeah, another person who was having trouble with his car was Pierre Gasly in his Alpine. He was having trouble with his brakes as well. Going off at the new turn 22, he was saying the brakes are completely rubbish. And so another issue that they need to get sorted out before qualifying, or yeah, before the race as well too, because you need your brakes here in Jeddah.
Yeah, but after all that crazy FP1, it was Max Verstappen who was P1 with a 129.6 after just
Yeah.
18 laps. And 4 tenths behind was Sergio Perez, who came second with a 131. So that was pretty far off Verstappen in terms of like qualifying times, but at the same time, it wasn't really qualifying type runs that would come later in the day.
Yeah.
But then came Fernando Alonso third in the Aston Martin, and there was Lance Stroll right behind him. So both Aston Martins up there. And then came the two Mercedes, Russell fifth and Hamilton sixth. Quite a long way off the pace. They were about a second off the Red Bulls, so they still had a lot they needed to find.
Yeah, definitely.
Then Carlos Sainz came seventh in the Ferrari. Then Gasly, after complaining about his braking issues, he still managed eighth. Then Albon ninth in the Williams and Tsunoda 10th in the Alpha Tauri.
Yeah, another good showing from Alex Albon too after he scored a point for Williams in Bahrain. Now looking to just continue that good form as well from on his side of the Williams garage.
Yeah. Now going into FP2 again, the Red Bulls look mighty quick. Still
Yeah.
a few issues here and there, but otherwise both drivers looked really happy with their setups. I mean, considering they were flying, Verstappen again topped the session with a 129.6, and Alonso was 2 tenths behind that. So Verstappen looking ever more confident in the Red Bull, and he had just gotten to the track that day too, so that itself was also mighty impressive. But one driver who was struggling kind of, again, it was a Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. He did a practice start in the pit lane, and
Yeah.
he didn't quite get away well, and he didn't know what happened. So his engineer had to come back to him and tell him it was like a little bit of a clutch issue, like it sort of slipped and he didn't get off the line as best as he could. He got a lot of wheel spin, and so that's not really an issue that you want to be having, especially since the start is one of the most important parts of the race. So Ferrari really needed to fix that issue for Leclerc.
Yeah, Max Verstappen was also having an issue with his downshifts as well. He was saying to the team that his downshifts were really bad, but clearly it wasn't hurting him, I guess, and clearly a quick fix for Red Bull as they still had a really good pace, but we've seen how championships can swing due to poor reliability in the past. So we just or Red Bull need to just make sure that they have a good reliable car because the pace is there right now. They have two really good drivers. So but luckily I think they're able to get it fixed.
Yeah, and again we saw more people going off at turn that new reprofile turn 22. We saw the Aston Martins going off and the Alpha Tauris going off there. So it was really a new thing that they had to get used to, because that obviously got a lot tighter, and drivers, they still want to carry that same speed, but you just can't anymore because of how tight it is. So the drivers would
Yeah.
have to find that limit.
Also, another turn that people were going off was at turn 1, 2. We saw the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas going off at turn 1 in FP2. And also George Russell in the Mercedes too. Just a lot of cars not being able to slow down their car just in time. And also we saw Yuki Tsunoda at turn 22. He went off, but not at the place where everyone else was going off. He kind of tapped his left rear wheel on the wall, and that just threw him off his racing line, so he had to go off. So a lot of drivers just ironing out their mistakes and trying to make the most of the time they had on the track.
Yep, and again we saw more traffic in FP2. We saw Leclerc being blocked by the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll, and then we saw Alex Albon having to slow down because of that. And then Leclerc again got blocked by the Haas of Nico Hulkenberg, and so he was pretty annoyed about that. And so there was just a lot of traffic everywhere. We also saw Piastri getting blocked by a Ferrari and Alpha Tauri. So
And Yuki Tsunoda also got blocked by the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton too, while Hamilton was coming out of the pit lane.
yeah, it shows how the engineers really have to keep an eye out for all the other cars going around the track, because the drivers need to get out of the way on this track, especially if there are people on fast laps behind them. Because even if there's a small tap, these cars are going at such high speeds around this track that that small tap could lead into a massive crash into the wall. So it's extremely dangerous.
Yeah, and also these cars are super heavy too, so it's much harder for them to slow the car down compared to previous years. So that's just another reason as to why the engineers need to be on it with the communication to the drivers. So at the end of FP2, then it was once again Max Verstappen who finished in P1, 2 tenths ahead of Fernando Alonso who finished in P2. So it was kind of a similar top three that we've been seeing this season, with Perez in P3, and then surprisingly it was Ocon in P4. So maybe Alpine was showing some good qualifying pace, because obviously a lot of teams were doing quali runs in FP2 because these were the conditions that are going to be the most similar to conditions on during qualifying, because it's nighttime and the time is the same. So obviously the conditions are going to be very, very similar, if not exact. So a lot of teams were doing quali runs. So Alpine up there with Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly in sixth showed that they have a really good qualifying car.
Yeah, Alpine are looking really strong. I mean, when you look at Bahrain, it wasn't really a track that suited them a lot. Gasly did fight his way back up, but Jeddah seems to suit them a lot better than Bahrain did.
Yeah, and also it was George Russell in the Mercedes splitting the two Alpines in fifth, with Stroll down in seventh, and then Hulkenberg eighth, Leclerc ninth, and then Carlos Sainz in 10th. So both Ferraris in quali runs not showing really good pace, but obviously Ferrari, we've seen them struggle in practice and then bring it for qualifying in the race too. So maybe it's just one of those weekends for them.
And FP3, now going on to FP3, it was the final chance for drivers to perfect their setups before qualifying. But one man who wouldn't be able to get that privilege was Nick de Vries.
Yeah.
After AlphaTauri noticed an issue in his car, they had made him come into the garage and they had to change his power unit for precautions. But that meant he wouldn't be able to get onto the track for FP3. And so that was a real shame for him, because FP3 is a quite crucial it's quite a crucial session, because drivers use that like the final thing. They've had the most track time before qualifying in FP3, so to not get that track time is pretty disappointing.
Yeah, it would be different too if it was a track like Austria, where it doesn't take a lot of laps to master the track fully, and this is a track like Jeddah, which I think Nick de Vries is the only driver too that has never raced previously in on this track too.
Yeah.
So that just makes it even more difficult for him, and Jeddah is such a difficult track to get right. I've tried it out a few times myself on the game, and it is a pretty difficult track, but it's really fun to drive. But in real life is definitely scary, probably, and definitely takes a lot to get perfect.
Yeah, and what makes it even scarier, again, we had more traffic this session. The major incident was when Lando Norris
Yeah.
got blocked by Max Verstappen, and Max Verstappen, fair play to him, he went over and apologized to Norris, but you saw he was quite frustrated with his engineer because Verstappen's engineer never informed him that Norris was coming behind, and so that was a close call because Norris could have easily crashed into the back of the Red Bull, but thankfully his quick reflexes prevented that.
Yeah, also Leclerc was having a bit of deja vu this practice session because again he tried to do a practice start and again he had a problem with it. This time he lost the first shift too. So again Leclerc having troubles with starts and not what he needs before because if they can't get that fixed before the race too, then it's just gonna be miserable for him if he tries to get off the line.
Yep. Another weekend it might be miserable for is McLaren. Both of
Yeah.
them, like they weren't really showing a lot of good pace in FP3, and so it was pretty disappointing for them. I mean, cause like they did show okay pace earlier in the day, but then like later on, like Lando Norris did finish P7 in his McLaren, and Piastri did finish P8 in FP3, but these sessions weren't really like as close to
Yeah, they weren't
qualifying
really
as
replicating
FP2.
them, yeah.
Yeah. So I think McLaren are really worried probably for qualifying at the end of FP3 because they didn't have the pace that the other cars around them like Alfa Romeos and Alpines who they expect to be in the battle with. They don't have that pace.
Yeah, well, Norris didn't seem too worried about it. In the press conference on Thursday, he kind of said that people were overstating their problems in Bahrain and that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. So Norris is pretty optimistic about it. So hopefully the team is as optimistic as he is.
I mean, he needs to be optimistic because he signed a contract extension with them.
Yeah.
So he needs to think that the problem won't be a big issue. And McLaren need to also get on top of their car. I mean,
That's
if they
true,
have
yeah.
a really bad car, they're going to lose an extremely great talent in Lando Norris. So they really don't want to be doing that because not a lot of drivers will then want to go to McLaren if they keep giving bad cars like that.
That's true too. It's the same thing with Ferrari. There are multiple teams who are willing to sign their drivers if the drivers aren't happy with the state of the team. So at the end of FP3, then it was the same person on top. It was Max Verstappen again on top, this time by 6 tenths clear of his teammate Sergio Perez. And it was Fernando Alonso once again in the top three. Then Stroll was fourth for Aston Martin, so it was Aston Martin 3 and 4. Then Hamilton in fifth, surprisingly, ahead of Leclerc, then Norris, Piastri, Gasly, and then Sainz to complete the top 10.
Yep. Now going into qualifying, Q1 was really hectic. We saw a
Yeah.
lot of drivers making so many mistakes, and it was just like, what has just happened? Because in FP1, 2, and 3, there were almost no mistakes made. But then it's like in Q1, someone flicked a switch, and like every driver was making mistakes. So it was
Yeah.
really weird to see.
I guess it was like the drivers now fully pushing because they know what's going to happen if they don't get a lap right, especially for the rookies too. Where we saw Logan Sargent, it was really we really saw him make mistakes and then get frustrated throughout the qualifying.
Yeah, what happened with him was at the coming down the front straight, like when he was dashing to the line, he accidentally put his left front tire a bit too far over the left white line, almost into the pit entrance, and the FIA saw that and they were really strict about it, and
Yeah.
they deleted his lap because of that, and that lap would have been well great enough to get him into Q2 for the first time ever. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to keep that lap time. So when he went again, he spun and he was like pretty frustrated. So that lap deletion got to his head a little bit because he spun on his next lap.
Yeah.
And then after that, he locked up into turn one, went over that exit curb, and that was game over from him. He had to stop the car on the track, and it showed that that thing got to his head, that lap time deletion. So it just comes with experience to learn how to deal with things like that. But Sargent needs to learn that he can't get flustered by things like that.
Yeah, especially because he had a lot of pace too. So yeah, for him to throw it all away like that, that wasn't like good. on his side at all. But he wasn't the only rookie to make a mistake too, because we also saw Nick DeFries spin as well at turn one.
But that really wasn't his mistake.
Yeah, that's true.
His car wasn't fully calibrated after he missed out on FP3, and so what happened was when he pushed the brake pedal, the brake by wire, which is like an electronic signal sent from the brake pedal to the brake disc itself, that wasn't fully calibrated, and so when DeFries just tapped the brake pedal, the whole rear just completely locked,
Yeah.
and that got away from him, and so he spun. So that wasn't really driver error, but it was still unfortunate because that was a set of tires absolutely wasted from the flat spot.
Yeah, but we also saw a mistake from Lando Norris too. When trying to set a lap time, he clipped his front left tire on the wall, on the inside wall, and on turn 27, the very last corner in the circuit, and that damaged his suspension. So that was it for him in qualifying. He had a time already, so he wouldn't be starting last. But that's still like he missed out on a chance to get into Q2 and potentially Q3 as well.
And another unusual spin, again, more spins in Q1. One highly unusual spin came from Fernando Alonso when he was exiting turn 2. He put the power down. He just got a bit too trigger happy with the throttle, and that sent the Aston Martin round. And so that was highly unusual from a driver like Fernando Alonso to be making errors like that. But he knew how to deal with issues like that. Like Sargent, he got a bit too flustered with the mistakes that he made. Alonso knew how to deal with it, and he kept a clean lap to get himself into Q2.
Yeah, a sergeant said in the press conference too that on the last lap where he spun, he was actually up on his previous time that would have got him into Q2, and so he felt like he didn't need to push as much as he did. So he said like himself he ruined it for him and the team.
Yeah, it was pretty sad for him. But at the end, we saw Lando Norris not able to get through after his damage done to the McLaren. Sargent wouldn't be getting through either. So in the end, it would be Sargent starting 20th with Norris 19th. Then Nick DeFries 18th after he couldn't get out with his AlphaTauri, just not enough practice that day. And then Alex Albon 17th. So both Williams weren't showing pace. Well, actually, no, they were showing pace, but they just couldn't convert. Sargent was looking quicker than Albon actually. That was really good to see. And then Yuki Tsunoda wouldn't be able to get through, and so that also was such a shame for AlphaTauri. After they really need to step their game up. I mean, Franz Tost, he said in the press conference on Thursday, he didn't trust his engineers anymore with the developments they were making to the car, and so that's not something that you want to hear as an engineer. The trust issues between your team principal and yourself, like, so AlphaTauri does. Engineers and designers need to step their game up and get AlphaTauri back to where they were in like 2021.
Yeah.
Like 2021, they were really competitive, and then these new regulations have thrown them off quite a lot.
Yep. So now moving into Q2, then we saw Max Verstappen have a big moment at one of the turns, but it was basically he was making a left and then he lost the rear of his car, but luckily he was able to catch it, but he had to abort his lap after that. But later on in Q2, we saw a drive shaft issue from Max Verstappen. He hadn't set a competitive lap at all, and when he was trying to set another one, he just completely stalled out because of a drive shaft issue. So that was Max Verstappen out of qualifying, and he would start the race in 15th position now.
Yeah, it was a really big shame for him. He was just coming down the straight, passing Perez. Perez was letting him by to complete the lap.
Yeah.
And then you could hear from his onboard just the revs increase dramatically. You could hear like gears grinding that weren't supposed to be. It sounded like really bad, but it was actually relatively minor. They just needed to fix that issue. It was a small issue of just fixing the transmission and drive shaft. But Verstappen, that didn't change the fact that Verstappen would be out of Q2 and he'd be starting 15.
Yeah, especially after how quick he's looked all weekend too. That's just a big blow to him and Red Bull. And again, this reliability playing its part with a team like Red Bull. But of course, we know that they bounce back even in the race. I still think Verstappen could have won that.
Yeah, it was also a blessing in disguise for Charles Leclerc, who would be taking the 10 place grid penalty for his control electronics to see one of his main rivals starting behind him, that would give Leclerc a lot of confidence. But as we know, the Red Bull is on a completely different level than the Ferrari currently. So Leclerc would have to get his elbows out if he wants to keep Verstappen behind him.
Yeah, so the five we lost from Q2 were Max Verstappen after his issue, Valtteri Bottas, Kevin Magnussen, Zhou Guanyu, and Nico Hulkenberg. So both Hasses and both Alfa Romeos out in Q2.
Yeah, it was a really big shame because I think both those cars showed a lot more pace than usual than what they showed in Q2. But
Yeah.
it was unfortunate that they couldn't deliver. But Oscar Piastri, fair play to him.
Yeah.
While he probably did get helped by other misfortunes, he got his McLaren into Q3, that woeful McLaren, where Lando Norris couldn't even get the lap together. He made a mistake and hit the wall. Piastri kept it clean and got into Q3 for the first time ever. So fair play to him.
Yep. So now going into Q3 then, and the final fight for pole position, and it looked to be game on now between Leclerc, Alonso, and Perez, as both of them were looking really quick. As the first round of laps came in, it was Leclerc originally who looked at the top by a tenth ahead of Russell, and Alonso was only down in third, a little bit more than a tenth and a half behind Leclerc, and he was behind Russell as well. But then as Perez came to complete his lap by a monumental 4 tenths of a second, he finished ahead of Charles Leclerc and took provisional pole from him.
It was a really good lap by Perez. We obviously know he's a master on street circuits after his victories in Monaco and Singapore last year. So it was no surprise to me personally to see Perez flying in Saudi Arabia. It was a fantastic lap. He kept everything together.
Yeah, especially after he took pole position here last year for only his second pole in his career and a well-timed pole. But as the second set of laps came in, we saw Lance Stroll go purple in the first sector by 7/100ths of a second. He was up on Perez through the first sector, but throughout the rest of the lap, then he had a personal best middle sector and a pretty bad last sector, so he ended up finishing 6 tenths behind Perez and unable to improve on his fifth place position.
Yep. So another person that we saw flying, Leclerc, he finished just a tenth off Perez, but
Yeah.
he would be starting back out way back of the grid. But like even Sainz, we saw Sainz setting personal sector best sectors, but then he was only able to go fifth. But that would become fourth as Leclerc would start lower, and that meant Alonso would also get onto the front row. So it was a really interesting qualifying Q3. And so the starting grid for the top 10 that it would be after Leclerc's penalty would be Sergio Perez on pole, and then Alonso beside him on the front row.
Yep.
And then Russell third, Sainz fourth. So that would be interesting to see what they could do from the second row. Then came Stroll in the other Aston Martin fifth, followed by Ocon sixth. So really good pace in the Alpine from Ocon. Then seventh for Hamilton, eighth for Piastri. Again, kudos to him for getting that woefully bad McLaren up into
Yeah.
the top 10. Then came Gasly ninth and Hulkenberg would start 10th.
Yep. So going into the race now, the big talking points were whether or not we could see if Alonso could get his elbows out at turn one and take the race lead from Sergio Perez. Would Perez be able to hold on, or would Max Verstappen charge his way from 15th on the grid to win the race? And also in the contenders from the back as well, whether they could make any fight for points. So as we saw the lights go out, then we saw a pretty poor getaway from Sergio Perez and a really good getaway from Fernando Alonso.
It was a
And
really good getaway. While Perez had the faster reaction time, just Alonso got much less wheel spin, and so he was able to get the power down more easily going into turn one. So it was a nice start from the Aston Martin.
yeah, and he kept his position ahead of Sergio Perez, and we saw Leclerc and Russell getting close together, but Russell was able to stay ahead, and that Leclerc then opened the door for Lance Stroll as well, who tried to get a look at him, but just couldn't take the position away. So it was Alonso from Perez, Russell, Leclerc, Stroll, then came the Alpine of Esteban Ocon, then Lewis Hamilton and Oscar Piastri stayed ahead of Pierre Gasly. But Oscar Piastri had some damage too after making contact with the Alpine of Pierre Gasly. So once again, Oscar Piastri's race ruined because of an incident.
Yeah, it was such a shame for him. He just got pinched on the exit of turn two, going into turn three, and because of that, he lost his front wing end plate. So he had much less downforce than the other cars. Because losing a big part of your front wing just completely kills your downforce, and obviously the other cars coming at much faster speeds with their full downforce would be able to much more easily pass you. And on Jeddah, you need all the downforce you can get to keep that high minimum speed throughout the corners. And so, because it would cost him so much time, McLaren decided to box him at the end of lap one to fix his front wing.
Yeah, and also we saw on lap one, we saw Lance Stroll make a really good move on Carlos Sainz at the banking corner, and he went all the way around the outside and got past the Ferrari, who seemed to be struggling in the opening parts of the race on the medium compound of tire. But Sainz tried to fight it back, but he just couldn't get past the Aston Martin quick enough.
Yeah, and then while all of that was happening, as we progressed through the laps, we saw Verstappen finding his way through the field, getting past cars one by one. He was able to make his way into the top 10. We saw him clear a lot of cars actually down the main straightaway, because I think he learned from last year when he was almost about what looked like he was about to overtake the car into the final corner. He just backed out and
Yep.
waited to overtake them down the front straight. So he definitely learned that against Charles Leclerc last year. So that was pretty tactical and clever from Verstappen to make the overtake into turn one rather than turn 27.
Yeah, and also we saw Fernando Alonso then get a 10-second time penalty, I think it was, or
It was
a
5
5-second time penalty because of improper grid starting position. He was way too far to the left and outside of his grid box, and maybe that could have helped him get a better launch. I don't know, but in the end, he was given a 5-second penalty that he would have to serve at his first pit stop.
Yep, and while that might not have ruined his race, one man's whose race got ruined, not Oscar Piastri, but his teammate Lando Norris. He had to pit at the end of like lap two or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what the issue was. Maybe he got damaged or something, but Norris had to pit, and so that put him way at the back end. So it was another really disappointing start to a Grand Prix for McLaren this season. Both of their drivers running 19th and 20th
Yeah.
at one point. So it was pretty disappointing for them. I mean, a team like McLaren, you wouldn't expect that, but we look to see if they could carve their way throughout the field more. And try as they might, just their drivers couldn't gain positions unless it was other people pitting around them. So
Yeah.
it was a shame for them.
On lap 4, we were able to see Sergio Perez retake the lead, or take the lead for the first time in this race, ahead of Fernando Alonso too, and he was able to keep that position ahead. And then 3 laps later, on lap 7, we saw a three-way fight between the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, the Alpine of Pierre Gasly, and then Lewis Hamilton ahead of him. It was a really nice move from Leclerc, who outbraked Gasly into turn one, and he was able to keep the position at, behind Hamilton, but ahead of Gasly now. And that was really good braking from Leclerc, as to brake late enough to outbrake Gasly, but then to brake where he wouldn't run into the back of Lewis Hamilton, because we saw a similar issue in the sprint race in Formula 2 on Saturday, where Theo Porcher he overtook, I think it was Jack Crawford or someone, but outbroke himself and then hit the Ferrari Academy driver of Ollie Behrman. So Leclerc was good enough to avoid an incident like that.
Yep. And now then going on to lap 12, we saw Verstappen making an overtake on his former rival, probably current rival too, Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
And I mean, thankfully it didn't get as bad as it did in 2021, but that was mainly because the Red Bull just had so much more speed. I mean, Verstappen cleared Hamilton halfway down the main straight. He didn't even need to outbrake the Mercedes into turn one.
Yeah, a thing about Red Bull this race is that their DRS seemed to be working a lot better than any other team. It was just suiting their aerodynamics a lot more, and they were able to gain 17 kph, I think, down the straights extra with the DRS flap open. But 1 lap later, on lap 13, we saw Charles Leclerc get past the other Alpine of Esteban Ocon, and Leclerc on the soft compound tires just charging his way through the field, trying to make up positions after his grid penalty.
And quickly after that, on lap 14, Verstappen cleared the Alpha Tauri, or the other Alpine of Esteban Ocon.
Yeah.
And so again, just showing the Red Bull's DRS helping out a lot more, and it was really good designing from like Adrian Newey, because with DRS you can you want to get rid of all that drag, but you can also sacrifice downforce when you open DRS, because you're on a straight, you don't need downforce, you just want
Yeah.
to reduce drag. And so Red Bull's DRS works where not only does it reduce drag, but it also gives up less downforce in order to get a higher top speed, which is perfectly fine because you don't need downforce on a straight. So it just showed like here, especially where higher speeds on another car really do help. Red Bull was just mighty fast at charging through the field.
Yeah, and also on that same lap too, then we saw an issue from Lance Stroll, who was having a really good race at the time. His engineer told him to stop his car immediately and pull over to the side of the track, and that's not at all what Aston Martin or Stroll would have wanted. But this brought out the safety car, and it was a weird safety car because it looked like Stroll had parked his car in the escape road where the marshals didn't have to go onto the track, but the FIA said that they brought it the safety car because the GPS was saying that the car was still on the track. So it's probably a piece of the rear wing just sticking out onto the track, and that's why they had to bring out the safety car.
Yeah, if you look at the regular like TV cameras, like looking at where Stroll had parked his car, you would have seen there was no need for a safety car. But
Yeah.
obviously, the FIA wanted to just take precautionary measures, but it was not really quite necessary. And Red Bull, it was a sort of win loss for Red Bull kind of, because while Verstappen was able to make a cheap pit stop and keep the position he was in, Perez, who had also this whole time been building out a pretty big gap to Alonso, it was like 4 or 5 seconds before
Yeah.
the safety car. He lost all that, but Perez would still be able to make a pit stop. But it was definitely a big win for Fernando Alonso, because he was able to make that pit stop and serve his 5 second penalty. So we thought it would be a win. But as we found out after the race, it really wouldn't be,
Yeah.
because we saw something similar like what happened to Ocon in Bahrain happen to Alonso. So when Alonso was serving his time penalty, you're not allowed to touch the car in that time. So it was 5 seconds for Alonso, he had to wait. So none of the mechanics are allowed to touch the car for 5 seconds. But what happened was the Aston Martin's mechanic who was holding the rear jack, they touched the back of the Aston Martin with the jack and got it ready to just push up instead of having to go up and then push the car
Yeah.
up. And so that was specifically not allowed from the FIA. And so what happened was then it was found out after the race that Alonso would get a 10-second time penalty for
Yeah.
that consequence, because of that rear jackman touching his car during that time period, and that would have severe implications on Alonso's end result.
Yeah, he would obviously lose a podium because of that too. But towards the end of the safety car period, we saw Leclerc getting very frustrated with his engineer because he told him to push to get out ahead of Hamilton, but at the wrong time. So Leclerc lost a position to Hamilton when coming out of the pit lane, and Leclerc was really frustrated about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, engineer driver communication, just
Yeah.
Ferrari didn't have that at that particular moment, and so Leclerc didn't realize that he needed to push that hard to keep ahead of Hamilton, and Hamilton was able to get the jump on him at that safety car restart. And it was pretty annoying for Leclerc, because they know that the Mercedes will look just about as quick as the Ferrari
Yeah.
in this weekend, which was good for Mercedes but bad for Ferrari, so that's why Leclerc was really annoyed.
Yeah, so now going on to lap 20, then the safety car ended, and Sergio Perez got a really good safety car restart, and he caught Alonso napping, and Perez was able to streak into the lead ahead of the Aston Martin. Behind the Aston Martin, Max Verstappen was now in fourth. But before that, we saw Russell trying to challenge Alonso into turn one, but Alonso was able to keep ahead of the Mercedes and with Verstappen behind as well. So now the safety car had really played out into Verstappen's hands, because before he was a pit stop behind the race leader Sergio Perez, and now he was just about 2 seconds behind him.
And now going on to lap 22, we saw Hamilton trying to overtake the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz after having gotten the jump on Leclerc. And so Hamilton tried to go round the like down the inside of Carlos Sainz into turn one, but
Yeah.
Sainz kept it firm and braked late as was Hamilton. And then so Hamilton tried to go around the outside, and then it turned into the inside for turn two. But Sainz, when he braked late, he went a bit too deep, and that allowed Hamilton to get the switch back on him and better traction on the Mercedes because Hamilton had the medium tires and Sainz had the hard. And so Hamilton was able to get ahead of both Ferraris after a safety car period. And so if you really think about it, it was Ferrari's own fault that they lost two positions because
Yeah.
if they had Leclerc in front of Hamilton like they should have had it if it weren't for that communication blunder, then Hamilton could have maybe like stood behind Leclerc a lot more because we know Leclerc seems a lot more aggressive than Sainz, but because of Ferrari brought it upon themselves, Hamilton was able to get past both Ferraris.
Yeah, and then so on lap 23, we saw Max Verstappen breeze past George Russell even before they got to the final corner. So Verstappen was able to get that move done really early and then still keep ahead of George Russell going into turn 1, 2. And just 2 laps later, he was putting the pressure on Fernando Alonso as well. And into turn 1, Verstappen got ahead of the Aston Martin. So now it was a Red Bull 1, 2 with Perez ahead of Verstappen and Alonso just holding on in third place.
Yeah, and we thought it would be like that for quite some time, but later we saw on lap 26, we saw Alex Albon experience a brake failure, and so he
Yeah.
couldn't brake, and we thought it maybe was just a brake issue because he actually went past the pit lane. He continued on for another lap, but he found out that it was a full-blown problem, and he would have to do a whole lap extremely slowly and limp back to the pits. And so because of that, Sargent, his teammate, who was having actually quite a good race, showing a lot of pace, he was able to
Yeah.
finally get past his teammate as well as a lot of other cars. And Albon was trying to stay out of the way as best as he could because he was a hazard on the track, especially with these blind corners. Him going so slowly, so thankfully he was able to keep out of the way.
Yeah, so up until that point towards lap 38, we saw Sargent trying to pass Nico Hulkenberg, and he spent like 5 laps trying to get past the Haas, and I think he was pushing too much because he damaged his tires in the end, because after that, from lap 38 onwards towards the end, he was just dropping back through the order from P13, and the first person to get him was Zhou Guanyu after a really impressive move of just completely outbraking Sargent from the outside into turn 1. He was able to get past the Williams pretty easily too.
Yep, Joe Guanyu obviously one more year of experience, and Sargent knows how to adapt to these cars
Yeah.
better than him, and so that's why he had more confidence on the brakes than Sargent did.
Yeah, and also during this time we saw Max Verstappen complaining about an issue of a weird noise at high speed. So probably another issue with the drive shaft as well, but clearly one that didn't affect his race in the end.
Yep, but now going on to lap 46, we saw a big battle between Kevin Magnussen trying to overtake Yuki Tsunoda for the final points positions, like ninth and 10th, and so Magnussen had been trying for so long to get past Tsunoda because Tsunoda had much older tires than Magnussen. So Magnussen went braked late into turn 1, and Tsunoda tried to fight him back through turn 2 and 3, but Magnussen was able to stay ahead, and then we actually heard his radio. He yelled like no because he was so
Yeah.
mad that he knew he couldn't keep Magnussen behind him now. Magnussen has so much fresher tires, and we saw he just waltz away with those new tires, and that left Tsunoda pretty ticked off because then he got put down into 11th and out of the points.
Yeah, and also throughout this time, Sargent was continuing to fall behind Nick de Vries, and then all the way up to the final lap, where McLaren allowed Piastri to get past Lando Norris. They did team orders down at McLaren, and then Piastri was able on the last lap to get past Logan Sargent. But out front, it was a very controlled and very calm drive from Sergio Perez, who dominated this race and won the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix for the first time in his career,
I think
ahead
he
of
led
Max
every
Verstappen.
lap. Did he lead every lap?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was a really confident drive from Perez. He just led the whole way while Verstappen was charging his way through the field. Perez was just out front, like miles ahead of second place or third place, whoever it would be. It didn't matter. Perez was ahead.
Yeah, and also once again seeing Sergio Perez how quick he is on a street circuit. I think the third street circuit he's won at now, Monaco, Singapore, and now Saudi Arabia too. And so behind Max Verstappen came Fernando Alonso, who crossed the line in P3, but then he got a 10-second time penalty in the end, demoting him down into P4. So the final race classification was Alonso finished in fourth, and so George Russell got his first podium of the season ahead, along with Mercedes' first podium of the season as
It was a
well.
good drive from Russell, calm and composed. We actually saw Mercedes wanted to overtake Russell, but Hamilton wanted to overtake Russell, but and Mercedes were trying to do that, but Russell was like, no, we're gonna I'm gonna keep ahead and like keep going and stay ahead of Hamilton, and he like pulled the pin and he just absolutely disappeared.
Yeah, so after Alonso in fourth came Hamilton, Sainz, Leclerc. Disappointing weekend for Ferrari, but a good weekend for Alpine in eighth and ninth, and then Kevin Magnussen picked up the last points for Haas. So thank you guys for listening to this episode of our podcast, and be sure to join us next time as we talk about the 2023 Australian Grand Prix. Thank you.